and we're talking with Gregg Braden. And as we mentioned earlier, Greg, we're at the Maritime Museum in Sydney.
Beautiful place.
Oh, check the view out. Check the view out.
Someone asked me if I'd seen the submarine, and I said, well, if there's a submarine out there, I'm probably not going to see it, am I? And they said, well, this one's above the water.
So also, if you can hear some noises, it's some of the rail links happening. So just bear with us. Before that last break, Greg, we're talking about your journey.
Yes.
So your career, prior to what you're now doing, was involved with what?
I was trained as a scientist in the physical sciences. My first degree was in geology as an earth scientist. I worked, it's interesting because each of my careers has happened during a decade where I could apply what I was learning and what I'd been educated to do to solve the problem of that time. So it was in the 1970s I was trained as an earth scientist during the oil crisis in our part of the world, in North America. And I began working for a company, Phillips Petroleum, the North Slope of Alaska, searching for new reserves of oil and gas. I was working on the computer side of things, and that became important later on, and on into the 70s. In the 80s, during the Cold War, the last years of the Cold War, I was a senior computer systems designer for a defense contractor, Martin Marietta Aerospace, working on a project called the Peacekeeper missile, or the MX missile. There's a whole story we could do about that time in the history of our world and why I found myself in that situation. In the 1990s, early 1990, 91, I found myself working for a small startup company out of Stanford University during the time that they became known as Cisco Systems, and they were the worldwide providers for the internet and the stability of the internet. I was the first technical managers and supervisor for technical operations for Cisco Systems. And I left all of that it actually was in 1990-91 because I think there's a bigger problem happening here. I feel like we have all the time we need, and now is the time for us to embrace the possibility that we're more than we've ever believed through our teachings and our culture, and to apply that greatness to alleviate the suffering and the war and the things that we see happening around us.
Okay, was there a catalyst on some level that moved you from working in the work you were doing to where you're now focusing your energy?
I believe the Cold War may have been that catalyst. I remember by day I was writing software for this in support of the MX missile, and by night I was pouring through ancient texts and the copies of the hieroglyphs on the temple walls, and when I could, I would journey into the places in Egypt and Bolivia and Peru and Tibet and China, Nepal, all through the Southwest, because my sense is that many of the problems we face in the world today, Robyn, we have because we feel that we're so separate from one another, in the war specifically. We're so separate from one another that when we find ourselves short of resources like oil or water or food or something like that, we feel we have to battle one another because of our differences. And we're looking at a part of the world now, a little strip of land in the Middle East, where the people believe they're so different they can't even coexist on that strip of land. And I know there are a lot of reasons for that. My sense was if we could look far enough back into our collective history, we would find a reason to transcend those differences. We would find a reason that tells us we're more than the differences that led to the wars. And if we can bring that understanding forward, that somehow we would avoid those kinds of wars in the new century that we saw so prevalent in the 20th century. And it was with that understanding that I left.